Hey, so, hi, I'm Megan, 29, and I work as a senior data analyst. Yep, I spend most of my days knee deep in spreadsheets and patterns, and honestly, I kind of love it. For the last 5 years, my life has revolved around two things: my career and this house. It's not just any house, though it's the one my grandparents built with their own hands. And, well, I thought everything was stable and predictable until my family showed up and turned it all upside down. It was one of those Sunday evenings that usually felt calm. You know, cool air drifting in through the kitchen window, jasmine from the garden kind of wafting in, and I was just planning out my work week, feeling in control. Then the doorbell rang. And wait, who could that be? I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and saw them, my parents, Anthony and Victoria, with Luke hanging slightly behind, shifting his weight nervously. Immediately, my stomach twisted. Surprise visits from them weren't a thing, especially not all three at once. I opened the door and tried to force a smile, like, "Hey, Mom, Dad, Luke, what's up?" My dad, Anthony, didn't even wait for me to step aside. He just kind of barged forward, that posture of his, always like he owned the space he walked into. He said, calmly but firm, "Megan, we need to talk." And then Mom followed, her voice soft, all rehearsed concern that never quite reached her eyes. Luke trailed behind, glued to his phone, looking completely uncomfortable. They sat themselves in the living room, the one where Grandma used to read me stories, and instantly, the air felt heavy, almost foreign. I stayed by the doorway. I didn't sit. I guess I didn't want to get too comfortable. "Okay," I said slowly. "Is everything all right?" My dad cleared his throat, and I knew what was coming was serious. He started talking about Luke, my brother. At 25, he was this freelance influencer type, taking photos in expensive clothes he couldn't afford, posting vague motivational stuff online. He hadn't had a steady job in years. But apparently, he had this grand new plan to launch a lifestyle brand and, well, he needed a base. And naturally, my house was perfect. I felt this cold dread wash over me. I could already guess where this was heading. "He can't live here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "There's no room, and I work from home." My mom tried to soften it, her voice all honeyed. "Honey, that's what we need to discuss. It's not about him moving in with you." But then my dad hit me with it. They wanted me to move out. They were giving the house to Luke. I stared at them, completely convinced I had misheard. "Wait, what? This is my house. Grandma and Grandpa left it to me." Anthony scoffed. It was that ugly, dismissive sound, the kind that makes your stomach churn. "They left it to you to look after. Megan. It was always meant to stay in the family. Your grandfather would have wanted his grandson to have it. A man needs a solid foundation." My mind froze for a second. Luke had never hammered a nail, never built anything, and yet, somehow, that made him more entitled than me. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. "That's not true, Bun," I insisted, voice rising. "This house belongs to me. Wills can be contested," my dad said, voice hardening. "This is a family matter, not a legal one. Luke needs this house. You have a good job. You can afford your own place. A small apartment is all you need." I looked at Luke. He was staring at his sneakers, ignoring the entire conversation. "Do you have anything to say about this?" I asked. He shrugged, casually, still not meeting my eyes. "It's a good opportunity," he muttered. "The aesthetic is perfect for my brand." The aesthetic? My grandparents' house? He talked about my home like it was a backdrop for Instagram shots. I felt sick. My mother chimed in again, trying to frame it like a favor. Think of it as helping your brother. He's had a rough go of it. This could be the thing that sets him on the right path. Family helps family. But the hypocrisy my entire life had been treated differently. I saved for a car, character building, needed tuition help, life lesson. But Luke, they'd throw me out for him. The conversation spiraled. My father's voice got louder, more circular, claims about manhood, disrespecting grandparents, entitlement. Finally, he stood up, face furious. We're not asking. Megan, we're telling you. We've already spoken to a realtor about the transfer. You have until Friday to clear out your belongings. 5 days, I whispered, disbelief washing over me. You can't be serious. He boomed back. We have every right. It's our family home, and we decide who lives in it. Then he stormed out, Mom scurrying after him with one last pleading look. Luke, last to leave, glanced at me, flicker of guilt or annoyance, and muttered, "Don't make this a big deal. It's for the best." Then he was gone. I was left in the silence of the living room, the words "out by Friday" echoing. The peace of my Sunday shattered, replaced with this surreal, cruel ultimatum. They thought they could just take it all, my home, my life. And in that quiet, I realized the real chaos doesn't come from data. It comes from the people you trust the most, my own family, walking in, trying to evict me from the home my grandparents built. After the shock of their ultimatum, I couldn't just sit there. I needed proof, something solid, to show that this house was truly mine. I started in my grandfather's old office, a small, wood-paneled room that I had mostly left untouched over the years. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polish. Shelves lined with books on carpentry, engineering, and meticulous binders of blueprints stared back at me. It felt almost sacred, like I was stepping into a time capsule of my grandparents' lives. I went drawer by drawer, filing cabinet by filing cabinet, pulling out stacks of papers, receipts, and records. I found property tax statements from the past 30 years, repair receipts, the original deed. Everything was in my grandparents' names. My pulse quickened, but something still felt off. I remembered Dad mentioning a transfer at some point, vaguely. What kind of transfer? A quitclaim deed. A trust. It didn't make sense. My parents weren't exactly financially savvy, so why would they have used a complicated legal setup? As I dug deeper, rifling through an old accordion folder labeled Household Utilities, something caught my eye. Between electricity bills and water statements, there was a home equity line of credit application. My heart skipped a beat. It was dated a few years back, right before my grandmother's health took a serious turn. I picked it up carefully, the paper crackling in my hands, and realized immediately that it had been filled out, but not by my grandparents. The handwriting wasn't my grandfather's precise block letters or my grandmother's flowing cursive. It was messy, hurried, unmistakably my father's. I froze, and then I noticed the signatures. My grandfather's was passable, a bit shaky, but recognizable. My grandmother's wrong, smooth, fluid, nothing like the wobbly, looping script she had in her later years. My hands trembled as I stared at the forgery. They had tried to use my grandparents as collateral for one of my dad's get-rich-quick schemes. And I remembered vividly visiting around that time and overhearing my grandfather yelling at Dad in his office, "You will not gamble with this house, Anthony." Not while I'm alive, Dad stormed out, red-faced and silent. At the time, I thought it was just about money, but now I realized it was something more sinister. This wasn't just greed. This was deception, baked into years of behavior. A cold anger settled over me, but underneath it, a spark of determination. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just a quiet, compliant daughter who would quietly comply. Well, they were about to find out otherwise. Every drawer, every file, I combed through. I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence of the pattern. And this This forged application was a smoking gun. It tied everything together, a breadcrumb leading me to the truth. As I sifted through the rest of the office, memories surfaced, the times when Luke got gifts that I didn't, the moments when my parents' support felt conditional, the way they celebrated his smallest achievements while my own successes barely earned acknowledgement. It all painted a picture of favoritism and entitlement. Yes, but now it was tangible. Now it had consequences. The house wasn't just a home, it was the culmination of decades of enabling and neglect. And now it had become the battlefield. Hours passed. The sunlight shifted through the slats of the blinds, casting stripes across the piles of documents. I was methodical, almost obsessive. I double-checked dates, signatures, notes in the margins. The more I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't a last-minute whim. This eviction, the so-called transfer to Luke, it was a premeditated move. They'd been preparing for this, waiting for the moment they believed I'd be compliant, waiting for the right time to strike. And I thought back to that night when they delivered the ultimatum. Every phrase, every rehearsed line, it fit a pattern now. They weren't worried about legality. They were counting on my compliance. The arrogance was staggering. But the forgery that changed everything, that one misstep exposed them. It wasn't just the money, the property, the illusion of control. It was their willingness to cheat, to lie, to manipulate the law itself. They had a long history of deceit, and I was just beginning to uncover it. My hands shook as I held the application up to the light, tracing the letters, comparing them to known samples of my grandparents' signatures. My stomach churned, but beneath the shock was clarity. I had found the proof I needed. The first tangible piece in what would become a larger puzzle, and I couldn't stop there. No, I had to see this through. I spent the rest of the night in the office, cross-referencing documents, cataloging anomalies, and making mental notes of every inconsistency. Each scrap of paper told a story, each receipt and record a small victory in piecing together the truth. I realized my search was no longer just about ownership, it was about exposing the pattern, about unmasking the long history of betrayal that had culminated in this moment. Then it hit me. This wasn't impulsive on their part. They had tried to manipulate and deceive before, and I had been blind to it. The home equity application wasn't just an isolated act, it was part of a larger strategy of control. They had tested boundaries, exploited trust, and assumed that my compliance was inevitable. That assumption that I would passively accept their version of reality was the same one that had led to their audacious ultimatum. I leaned back in the chair, running a hand through my hair, and let out a shaky breath. Anger. Yes, but also a grim resolve. I couldn't let them define this moment. I couldn't let them rewrite the story of my grandparents' legacy. I thought about the house, every floorboard, every window frame, and the hands that had built it. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was love, labor, memories, and it deserved someone who understood its value, who would protect it. Determined, I planned my next steps. I would need more than the office findings. I would need proof. Concrete evidence that could withstand scrutiny, that could counter any claim my parents might throw at me. But for the first time in days, a sense of control began to return. The shock, the dread, the helplessness, they were giving way to strategy, to preparation, to purpose. I sat there late into the night, surrounded by decades of meticulous records and blueprints, piecing together a narrative that was as much legal as it was personal. Each document, each handwritten note, strengthened my understanding. My parents' confidence had been built on assumptions, on lies, on the idea that I would falter. But now, with this forged application and the memories it unlocked, I had something they hadn't counted on: knowledge, clarity, and the beginnings of a plan. And so, despite the fatigue, despite the heaviness in my chest, I felt a spark of empowerment. This wasn't just about protecting a house anymore. It was about honoring the truth of my grandparents' legacy, about reclaiming what was mine and ensuring that the deceit of my parents wouldn't stand. The first step had been taken, and there was no turning back now. I was ready to dig deeper, to follow the trail wherever it led, to uncover every shadow of their deception and bring the full picture to light. After hours of digging through the office, I realized the last place I hadn't fully explored was the attic. It felt almost sacred in a weird way. Grandma always called it the house's memory bank, filled with keepsakes, old decorations, photo albums, and treasures from our past. I pulled down the folding ladder, and the familiar scent of cedar and old paper hit me. Dust hung in the air, motes catching the weak light from the single bare bulb. Shadows stretched across stacks of boxes and objects draped in white sheets, turning familiar things into ghostly shapes. I started methodically, box by box, feeling like an archaeologist uncovering a forgotten civilization. There were old report cards, Grandma's knitting supplies, my grandfather's war medals, a box of Mom's high school yearbooks. But none of it was what I was looking for. Hours passed. Dust coated my clothes, sweat trickled down my back, and I began to think maybe there was nothing left to find, that maybe I was chasing ghosts. Then, tucked away in the darkest corner, behind a stack of old suitcases, I saw a small cedar chest, intricately carved, unmistakably special. My breath caught Elena's hope chest. I remembered her telling me stories about it when I was little. She had received it from her mother and kept her most precious items inside. I had always assumed it held old linens or lace for a future bride. I hadn't seen it in years and had completely forgotten it existed. I dragged the chest into the center of the attic floor, heart pounding. Every movement felt reverent, like I was about to uncover something sacred. I opened the lid slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside, carefully folded and stacked, were documents and a small folded letter in my grandmother's handwriting. My hand shook as I picked up the letter and unfolded it. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, of years kept safe in secret. I began to read, "My dear Megan." It started, "If you are reading this, know that your grandfather and I have always trusted you. We knew the day might come when your parents' intentions were not as they seemed. We created 2 wills. The one your father possesses is legally drafted, but it is not our final word. The document in this envelope with this letter is our true and final testament. It was drafted by a lawyer of unimpeachable integrity, and it was signed a month after the one your father holds. In the eyes of the law, the most recent will invalidates all previous versions. This document leaves the house and the majority of our savings directly and solely to you. There is no trust, no ambiguity. It is yours and yours alone." I froze, tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. I could barely breathe, reading every line as if my grandparents were speaking directly to me, reaching through time to protect me. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the rest of the letter, detailing the reasons for the secret will, the fears they had about my father's potential greed, and their heartbreaking decision to create a failsafe that would shield me from even my own family's betrayal. They explained the discovery of that home equity loan application, the one I had found in my grandfather's office. They had known that my father might attempt something similar and had planned accordingly. Every word radiated love and foresight, a meticulous protection plan I hadn't even imagined. "Live in this house, my dear girl," my grandmother wrote. "Fill it with laughter and love. Honor the work of our hands by building a life of your own within these walls. Do not let their bitterness tarnish your spirit. Your grandfather and I will always be with you in every beam and brick. We trust you to be the keeper of our home. We love you." I sat there in the dusty attic, clutching the letter to my chest, and I cried. I cried for the loss of them, for the love they had shown me even after their passing, and for the profound, painful betrayal of my parents. But beneath the tears, a feeling of empowerment began to rise. This letter wasn't just a sentimental gift, it was a legal shield, a validation of everything I was fighting for. My grandparents had anticipated everything, and they had made sure that I would be protected, no matter how far my parents' deceit went. After a few minutes, I wiped my tears and picked up the will itself. It was exactly as my grandmother had described, notarized, witnessed, and dated a full month after the fraudulent one my parents had been holding. My hands shook as I ran them over the paper. This was it. This was the silver bullet, the foundation of my defense. The fear and uncertainty that had been gnawing at me since that Sunday night melted away, replaced by a cold, steady resolve. They had underestimated me, but more importantly, they had underestimated the foresight and love of my grandparents. I felt an incredible wave of relief. The attic, which had felt oppressive and dusty moments ago, now seemed almost like a sanctuary. The light from the single bulb seemed warmer, the air lighter. I sat back, cradling the letter and the will, letting the enormity of what I had just discovered settle in. For the first time since the eviction ultimatum, I felt in control. I had the proof, I had the plan, and I had the knowledge that my grandparents had my back. Even as I thought about the confrontation that would inevitably come, a sense of calm washed over me. The document, combined with the heartfelt letter, gave me more than legal leverage. It gave me confidence, a sense of righteousness, and the reassurance that I wasn't just fighting for a house, but for the legacy of people who had built it with their own hands and loved it deeply. I ran my fingers over the cedar chest one last time, feeling the carved designs under my touch. I realized that my grandparents had left me more than just property. They had left me their trust, their wisdom, and a way to defend myself when the people I thought I could rely on had failed me. The betrayal of my parents felt heavy. Yes, but the love and foresight of my grandparents outweighed it. I was no longer just a victim of circumstance. I was armed with knowledge, proof, and the moral certainty that this home was mine. I carefully organized the documents in the chest, making sure nothing would get lost. Every signature, every line of the will was a testament to the foresight of two people who loved me deeply. I could feel their presence in the room, not just in the paper, but in the weight of their protection. It was as if they were there with me, silently guiding me, giving me strength. Finally, I took a deep breath and let a small smile tug at my lips. The tears had dried, leaving behind a clarity I hadn't felt in days. This house, this life my grandparents had entrusted to me, was mine to protect. And now, with the true will and the letter in hand, I knew I could. The fear that had loomed over the past days, the anxiety of impending confrontation, was replaced by a firm resolve. I would not be intimidated, and I would not be forced out. Their plan might have seemed unstoppable, but it had been anticipated, countered, and now it would fail. Sitting there in the attic, surrounded by memories and proof of my grandparents' love, I felt an overwhelming sense of empowerment. I had the shield I needed, the legal certainty, and the emotional backing of the people who had always loved me. I finally understood that this fight wasn't just about me. It was about honoring their legacy, about ensuring that their home remained a place of warmth, life, and integrity. And for the first time in days, I felt safe, strong, and ready. I took a deep breath and dialed the number for Isaac Vance, the lawyer my grandparents had trusted. My hands were shaking slightly, and I felt this weird mix of nerves and urgency, like everything depended on this single phone call. The line rang a few times before a polite receptionist answered. I explained who I was and asked for Mr. Vance, trying to keep my voice steady, though I knew it was probably trembling a bit. A calm, deep voice answered, "This is Isaac Vance." Just hearing it made me take another breath. There was something in his tone, calm, measured, but immediately commanding respect. I introduced myself. explaining that he had known my grandparents, Arthur and Alina Jensen. I briefly outlined the situation, the eviction ultimatum from my parents, their claim to the house through a trust, and my discovery of the hidden will in the cedar chest. As I spoke, I could feel my nervousness start to ebb, replaced by a growing sense of clarity. I was speaking to someone who actually understood the stakes. There was a pause on the line, and I almost held my breath, waiting. Then, finally, his voice came back, steady and warm. Arthur and Eleanor, of course I knew them. Arthur was one of the finest men I've ever known. How can I help you? Megan. Relief flooded me in that moment. It was surreal, almost like talking to a protective presence from my grandparents themselves. I laid out everything as clearly and concisely as I could. The ultimatum, the fraudulent trust, the letter, and the will. Isaac listened, letting me finish before speaking, his tone calm but sharp. He asked pointed questions about the documents, the timing, and the signatures, which made me feel like we were building a solid case together. I could tell he was methodical, mentally mapping out every detail as I spoke. I realized I was starting to trust the process and myself. The fear that had been gnawing at me since Sunday began to shift. I wasn't alone, and I had the law and the truth on my side. He asked me to bring all the documents, the letter, the will, everything I had found in the attic. He wanted to review them thoroughly before taking any next steps. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yes, absolutely. I said, I'll bring everything to your office this afternoon. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I organized the documents carefully, making sure I had originals, copies, and notes about everything suspicious I had found. My pulse raced with anticipation, but also with a strange calm. I finally felt proactive rather than reactive. This was planning, preparation. This was control. When I arrived at his office, a stately, book-lined space that smelled faintly of leather and old paper, Isaac greeted me with a warm, professional smile. His associate, Robert, stood nearby, tall and imposing, exuding quiet confidence. They were calm, collected, and I felt a wave of reassurance wash over me. I handed over the cedar chest's contents, the letter, and the will. Isaac began reviewing everything carefully, pointing out the notarization, the witnesses, the dates. He confirmed that this was indeed a valid, legally binding document, superseding the fraudulent trust and any will my parents might try to use. Every word he spoke grounded me further. This was real, this was solid, this was mine. Then we discussed strategy. Isaac was clear and methodical. We would let my parents arrive at the house, expecting me to be packing and compliant, and then we would present the evidence. The plan involved a formal notice asserting my legal ownership based on the true will, a cease and desist letter to prevent further harassment, and documentation outlining potential legal action regarding the fraudulent filing. I could feel my confidence growing with every detail. They thought they had anticipated my reaction, but we were turning the tables. Isaac and I went over every scenario. My parents' likely denials, Luke's potential indifference, any attempts at manipulation they were accounted for. He explained the importance of remaining calm and composed, letting him do the talking. I could almost visualize the confrontation, them storming in with confidence, expecting to intimidate me, and instead being met with the quiet, unassailable authority of law and truth. Robert chimed in with practical details, timing, presentation of documents, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. Every contingency was covered. I felt my anxiety transform into a steady, focused determination. This wasn't just a plan. It was a fortress. I could see it all so clearly now. Isaac asked the difficult but necessary question, my desired outcome. What did I truly want? Did I want to pursue criminal charges if my parents refused to back down? Or was my priority simply reclaiming my home? I thought carefully, feeling the weight of family and justice balanced against each other. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady. My goal is to secure my home and be free of them. I don't want to send them to prison, but I want them to understand the gravity of what they've done. If they fight us, I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to protect myself and my grandparents' legacy. Isaac nodded approvingly, clearly satisfied with my measured, thoughtful answer. The plan was set. There would be an opportunity for my parents to accept the truth and sign a legally binding no-contact agreement, or they would face the consequences of their fraudulent actions. The weight of anticipation was immense, but I felt grounded. I had clarity, I had support, and I had the law firmly on my side. By the time I left his office, carrying copies of everything and a renewed sense of purpose, the nervousness that had clutched me since Sunday had transformed into sharp, focused resolve. I had a strategy, a legal shield, and a team of professionals ready to back me up. For the first time in days, I felt like I had the upper hand. The confrontation with my family was looming. Yes, but I was ready. Every detail had been considered, every scenario planned for. I was no longer just a daughter caught in their web of deceit. I was a force they hadn't anticipated, and I was armed with truth, preparation, and the unwavering support of my grandparents' trusted advisor. That evening, I sat at home, reviewing the plan one last time in my mind. I went over the steps, imagined the possible reactions, and rehearsed my calm, measured responses. The house, the legacy of my grandparents, was at stake, and I felt an incredible sense of responsibility. But alongside that weight came empowerment. I wasn't helpless. I had evidence, I had allies, and I had a plan. And for the first time since that terrifying Sunday, I truly believed that I could protect what was mine, and that justice, quiet, methodical, inevitable, was on my side. Thursday morning arrived, and the house felt different somehow. Too quiet, almost holding its breath, like it knew what was coming. My phone buzzed constantly. Mom's texts first. Sweet, but manipulative. I know this is hard. Sweetie, but it's for the best. Followed by, your brother is so excited to get started. Have you found a place yet? And then, I saw a cute apartment downtown. Want me to send the link? Each one made my stomach twist, little jabs reminding me that they didn't care about how I felt, only about their plan. I stared at the screen for a long moment, finger hovering over the reply button, then remembered Isaac's advice: short, neutral, non-committal. So I typed, "I'm handling it." That was it. Calm, unreadable. I felt a small spark of control. Dad called twice, gruff, impatient, trying to sound casual, but dripping with condescension. Just making sure you're on schedule. The truck's booked for 9 a.m. Don't make this difficult. I replied evenly, letting the double meaning hang in the air without giving him a foothold. Luke texted too. Predictably, "Hey, can you leave the Wi-Fi password and the key under the mat?" TX, I almost laughed. The entitlement was ridiculous, but also infuriating. They really thought it would be that simple. I set the phone aside and turned my attention to the house. Cleaning became my ritual, my mental preparation, polishing the hardwood floors until they gleamed, scrubbing windows until the sunlight poured in unobstructed, tending the garden, pulling weeds, trimming the roses my grandmother had planted. Each action felt symbolic, a quiet reclaiming of my space, of my home, of my agency. It was like telling them, silently, that this house wasn't theirs to take. It was mine. As I worked, my mind ran through the coming confrontation. I imagined my parents walking in, expecting fear, emotion, compliance, but I would be calm, composed, focused. Every sweep of the mop, every scrub of the counter, Every adjustment to a pillow or a picture frame was preparation, a rehearsal, a way to assert that tomorrow I would not be shaken. I could feel the tension in my muscles, in my chest, but I let it fuel me rather than paralyze me. This anger, this frustration, was energy I could channel into determination. Moments of bitterness bubbled up, memories of years of favoritism, of Luke being celebrated for the smallest achievements while mine were overlooked. The chest tightened, but I let it sharpen my resolve instead of letting it control me. Not today, I whispered to myself. Not ever. By mid-afternoon, the house felt different, cleaner, brighter, infused with energy that was distinctly mine. Every corner, every surface, every plant in the garden had been touched with intention. This wasn't just cleaning, it was reclaiming, reasserting ownership. I walked through each room, mentally rehearsing my posture, my tone, my words for tomorrow. I practiced staying calm, neutral, unflappable, imagining every provocation and response. The thought of standing my ground, backed by the law and Grandma's letter, steadied me. Evening came, and I made a simple dinner, using my grandmother's fine china. Sitting alone at the table, it felt ceremonial, almost sacred. A final meal in the home I loved, taken with intention. I looked at the photos on the mantle, my grandparents on their wedding day, young and full of hope. Another of me as a child on the porch swing with them. Their love seemed tangible in the room, a quiet strength. I reminded myself why I was doing this, not for revenge, not for spite, but to honor them, to preserve what they had built and loved. As I cleaned up the dishes, I ran through the plan again in my mind, opening the door, letting them in, staying calm, letting Isaac and Robert take the lead, presenting the evidence, asserting my rights. Each possible scenario, each reaction accounted for, each doubt acknowledged and then set aside. I felt a steadying sense of control, as if I were walking through the motions of tomorrow in advance, preparing myself to face them without faltering. Before bed, I sat on the sofa, looking out at the garden in the dim light. The tension, the anxiety, the fear, they hadn't disappeared. But they had been harnessed, transformed into readiness. I felt a sense of empowerment, of agency, of certainty. This was about more than a house. It was about reclaiming my space, standing up to betrayal, and protecting the legacy my grandparents had entrusted to me. I went to sleep that night nervous, yes, but also resolute, focused, and ready. Tomorrow, I would not just face them. I would stand firm, armed with truth, preparation, and the unwavering guidance of my grandparents' love. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, and for once, the light felt almost defiant, like it was backing me up. I woke early, before the sun, and dressed not in casual packing clothes, but in something that felt deliberate, dark trousers, a crisp blouse. I wanted to feel composed, in control. My hands held the coffee cup steady, even though my stomach was buzzing with nervous energy. This was the day, the moment everything I had prepared for would either hold or fall apart. At exactly 8:30 a.m., a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Isaac Vance and his associate, Robert, stepped out, calm and authoritative. Isaac's eyes were sharp, intelligent, radiating confidence and reassurance. Robert, broad-shouldered and imposing, had this presence that could command a room without saying a word. They greeted me warmly but professionally at the door. "Are you ready?" Megan Isaac asked gently. I nodded, my throat tight but my voice steady. "I am." By 9 o'clock, the U-Haul rumbled down the street and parked awkwardly at the curb, scraping against the branches of the old oak my grandfather had planted. Behind it, my father's car pulled in. Anthony, Victoria, and Luke emerged, faces a mixture of rim satisfaction and impatience. Dad strode up the walkway, like he was leading a charge, completely confident, completely certain this was his victory. He tried the door handle, it was locked, and then pounded on the door. Megan, let's get this show on the road. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped aside. Expression neutral. My parents stepped in, Dad barking orders, Mom trailing, trying to maintain her practiced calm. Luke followed, scrolling on his phone until he finally looked up, eyes widening at the sight of Isaac and Robert standing in my living room. "Who the hell are you?" Dad demanded, red creeping up his neck. "These are my legal representatives," I said, voice steady, even, clear. No hesitation. Mom's smile faltered. Luke blinked, confused. Dad scoffed, dark flush on his face. "What is this?" "Some kind of stunt to buy more time. I told you the deadline is today." Isaac stepped forward, calm, composed, offering a hand that Dad ignored. "Mr. Jensen, my name is Isaac Vance. I was the personal attorney and a close friend of Arthur and Eleanor Jensen." My father's face tightened. "I never heard of you." He muttered. "Their lawyer was Mr. Gable," Isaac said smoothly, almost conversational. "I handled their more sensitive estate planning. We are here today to discuss the legal ownership of this property." He gestured to the coffee table where several files lay out neatly. Dad crossed his arms stubbornly. "There's nothing to discuss. The house is in a family trust. I'm the trustee. It's my decision who lives here. If you're done wasting my time, my daughter has a truck to load." Isaac's calm demeanor didn't waver. "The trust you're referring to, filed last year, is unfortunately fraudulent and invalid." I watched the color drain from my father's face. Mom gasped softly, sitting down on the edge of the armchair. "That's a lie." "Anthony," Dad sputtered. "It's a legal document." "Yes, it is a document," Isaac corrected gently, "but it is not legally binding. It was superseded by a more recent testamentary document. Here is the true and final will of Arthur and Eleanor Jensen, executed 1 month after the document you hold, witnessed and notarized." He slid a copy across the coffee table. "This is their actual final wish, this property and all its contents directly and solely to their granddaughter, Megan Jensen." I could see the shift in the room, almost physically. Dad's face went pale, then purple with rage. Luke grabbed the will, eyes scanning frantically. "What is this?" "This is fake," he stammered. "No," I said, finally speaking, voice calm but firm. "It's not." I gestured to the cedar chest. "I found it in Grandma's chest, along with a letter explaining everything." I looked directly at Mom. She had known I would find it. They both had. Her practiced smile disappeared entirely, replaced by a mixture of shock and desperation. "We were only trying to do what was best for the family," she said quietly, theatrically. "By forging my grandparents' signatures on a loan application," I said, voice like ice, "by coercing them into signing a will they didn't want, by filing a fraudulent trust to steal my inheritance. That was your idea of what's best." Dad's face contorted in disbelief. "You have no proof." Isaac held up another document, calm and deliberate. "Actually, we do. We have handwriting experts who can attest to the forgery on the loan application. And most importantly, we have this will, which invalidates your entire claim." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Filing a fraudulent document with the probate court is a felony, Mr. Jensen. It carries significant fines and potential prison time." The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Luke dropped the will onto the table as if it had burned him. The reality of their situation began to sink in. They weren't dealing with their compliant daughter anymore. They were facing the full force of the law. Dad, for the first time in my life, looked utterly defeated. The arrogance, the bluster, the certainty, it all evaporated. He sank onto the sofa, panic overtaking his face. Mom's quiet sobs subsided, replaced by sheer desolation. They were trapped in the consequences of their own actions. Isaac let the silence stretch, and then his tone shifted. Measured. Calm. Megan is a compassionate woman. She is not interested in sending her own family to prison. She is prepared to not report this felony to the district attorney on one condition. He pushed a document across the table, a settlement agreement. In it, you will affirm that Megan is the sole legal owner of this house. You will renounce any claims to the property, return any items taken from the house, and agree to a permanent no-contact order. Sign it, and this matter is closed. Their grand plan, the triumphant eviction, had crumbled before them. Dad picked up the pen first, hand trembling. He didn't even read the full agreement. Luke and Mom followed, equally defeated, moving like automatons. Luke muttered, "This is insane." And I said, voice devoid of emotion, "You stopped being my family when you tried to throw me out of my home." Sign the paper, all three signed, and Isaac gathered the documents, placing them neatly into his briefcase. "Very good," he said, finality in his voice. "Robert will escort you off the premises. A courier will deliver your copies later. Remember the terms. Any violation of the no-contact order results in immediate legal action." They shuffled out of the house like broken shadows, not daring to look back. The U-Haul remained parked, a monument to their failed ambition. The driver, who had been waiting patiently, shrugged when I told him the truck wasn't needed. I turned to Isaac, words failing me. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. Your grandparents did this. Megan, their love and foresight protected you. I was just the messenger," he replied, packing his briefcase. "Call if you need anything, but I have a feeling you're going to be just fine." As he left, I walked through the house. For the first time, it didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home, truly mine. The weight of my parents' expectations, judgment, and suffocating presence had lifted. The air felt lighter. I had won, not just legally, but emotionally. I had reclaimed what was mine, and finally, I felt free. After the confrontation, the house felt different, lighter somehow, like the air itself had shifted, and for the first time, it felt truly mine. I spent the following weeks slowly reclaiming every corner, and it wasn't just about tidying or rearranging furniture. It was about taking back my space, my life, and my sense of self. I began with the rooms that carried the heaviest memories, the ones still tinged with the weight of my parents' manipulations. I went through drawers, closets, and shelves, touching every item with care, deciding what stayed and what went. Anything that reminded me of their control, their favoritism, their expectations gone. I donated my mother's old books, the ones she had kept here for decades. I removed the framed family photos that had once depicted a happy household because that image had been twisted, co-opted by betrayal. It was painful, sure, but necessary. I needed room to breathe, to feel safe, and to feel like the house was really mine. Once the purging was done, I began decorating. The living room was my first focus. I painted the walls a warm sage green, something calming, grounding. The sofa my mother had insisted on years ago, stiff and unwelcoming, was replaced with a soft, comfortable one that invited you to sit and relax. Each choice, every color, every piece of furniture, every little object was deliberate. A declaration, this is my home, and I decide what it looks like. I arranged lamps, shelves, and art in a way that made sense to me, that reflected me, not anyone else. Moving through each room, placing objects, hanging pictures, adjusting curtains. It was more than decoration. It was reclaiming control, creating spaces that felt like a sanctuary rather than a battleground. Even Luke's old bedroom, which had been left untouched like a shrine to his childhood, got a complete overhaul. I cleared everything, painted the walls a bright, airy shade, and transformed it into a home gym. Plants, open space for movement, natural light streaming through the windows. It became a room of energy and growth. Rather than entitlement, it felt symbolic, almost liberating. This space, once a reminder of my parents' favoritism and Luke's presence, now reflected empowerment and independence. Every action, every decision was a statement that the house and my life were now fully mine to shape. The garden became another place of meditation and reclamation. I spent weekends planting flowers, tending to the vegetable patch, and connecting with the land my grandparents had cultivated with their own hands. I felt their presence in the soil, in the roses they had planted, in every corner of the garden, each pull of a weed, each planting, each pruning was both a tribute and a reaffirmation. I was honoring them by caring for the home they had built and nurtured. The garden became a living memory, a place where I could feel their guidance and love as I worked. Meanwhile, the consequences for my parents were unfolding quietly in the background. I heard through distant relatives that they had been forced to sell their own house to cover debts my father had accrued and to give Luke a down payment for a small apartment across town. His plans for a lifestyle brand never launched. It was strange, feeling a sense of justice without actively seeking revenge. I hadn't needed to punish them. The legal agreement, the settlement, the no contact order was sufficient. Their actions had consequences, and I was free to focus on building my own life. Over the following weeks, the house transformed alongside me. Each room reflected my choices, my personality, and my priorities. It became a space of warmth, creativity, and calm. I added personal touches, objects that held meaning, and spaces designed for relaxation and reflection. The oppressive weight of my parents' expectations, judgment, and control lifted with every change. The house, once a place of tension and conflict, now mirrored freedom and possibility. I began to feel the joy of ownership, of having a space that was truly mine, unshadowed by manipulation. Evenings became my favorite time, sitting on the front porch swing, watching the sunset, feeling the gentle evening breeze. I allowed myself to reflect. Sometimes, a flicker of sadness would cross my mind, for the family I had hoped for the relationships that had been fractured and lost. But those moments were fleeting, quickly replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for the family. I did have my grandparents, who had trusted me, loved me, and planned for my protection even beyond their lifetimes. Their presence was everywhere in the walls, the floors, the beams, the garden. They weren't just memories, they were living in the home I now cared for. I thought about what it truly meant to feel at home. It wasn't just the walls and the roof, it was safety, love, and intention. This house had become a living testament to my grandparents' care, their principles, and their foresight. It was a sanctuary where I could think clearly, feel safe, and be myself. And by reclaiming it, I was reclaiming a part of myself that had been suppressed for years. Each action I took, from painting the walls to arranging furniture, felt like a step toward freedom, toward healing, toward peace. The small details brought immense joy. Walking across the polished hardwood floors, sunlight spilling in through clean windows, feeling the softness of the new sofa, smelling the roses in the garden, it all added up to a profound sense of contentment. In the kitchen, preparing meals and enjoying them in the calm of the spaces I had shaped, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Each choice, each act of care, reinforced that this was mine. I had reclaimed my home, my life, and my peace. Sitting on the porch swing in the evenings became a ritual. I watched the garden sway in the breeze, reflected on the events of the past weeks, and allowed myself to fully feel the love of my grandparents. Arthur and Eleanor's trust, foresight, and guidance had reached through time to protect me. Their presence was tangible in every corner of the house, every floorboard, every brick. I could feel their pride, their love, and their faith in me as the keeper of their home. In those quiet moments, I finally understood what it meant to truly be at home. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a space to breathe, to grow, to feel sad and supported. It was a reflection of my choices, my values, and the legacy of the people who had built it with care and love. And in that understanding, I felt a deep sense of peace, empowerment, and gratitude. For the first time in a long time, I was not just surviving, I was thriving in a home that was fully, unconditionally mine. So, that's my story. It's been a whirlwind, honestly losing trust, facing betrayal, but ultimately reclaiming not just my home, but a sense of peace and control. My grandparents' love and foresight carried me through it all, and their legacy lives on in every corner of this house. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground or protect something that matters deeply to you? Drop a comment and share your experience. I'd really like to hear your thoughts.